She signed the divorce papers while 8 weeks pregnant. Her husband watched and said nothing. If you've ever believed that staying quiet was the safe choice, that swallowing your dignity was the price of keeping the peace, then you need to watch what happens when a woman who has been silent for 14 months finally decides she is done. Charlotte Whitmore did not scream. She did not beg. She did not fight for a man who had already chosen his family's opinion over her. She simply picked up the pen, signed every page, and then told them something that changed everything. This is her story. If it moves you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Charlotte's story has traveled. Now stay with me. Because what happens in the next 2 hours will remind you that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the most dangerous ones to underestimate. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, not by courier, not slid under a door in some cinematic gesture of cowardice. They were sitting on the dining room table when Charlotte came downstairs at 6 in the morning, placed there by her mother-in-law the night before with the same casual authority Evelyn Harrington used for everything: menu selections, guest lists, the precise arrangement of fresh-cut flowers in crystal vases that nobody was allowed to touch. Charlotte stood at the bottom of the staircase in her robe and looked at the papers across the room. She did not move for a long moment. The house was quiet the way expensive houses are always quiet. Insulated, sealed, the silence purchased along with the square footage and the address in Winnetka and the view of the lake that Evelyn mentioned every time she had guests. She walked to the table. She sat down. She pulled the papers toward her and began to read. Every clause, every line. The language was precise, the terms punishing in the way that only a family with 4 lawyers on retainer could make them. Charlotte would receive a settlement that sounded generous until you understood what she was giving up. 14 months of her life, her apartment in Lincoln Park that she had sublet when she moved in here, the career trajectory she had quietly stepped back from because Evelyn made it clear that a Harrington wife did not prioritize her own professional ambitions over the family's social calendar. She read all of it. Then she set the papers down and went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea because her stomach had been unreliable in the mornings for the past 3 weeks. And she had learned that ginger tea before anything else was the only thing that kept the nausea manageable. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She had known for 11 days. She had not told Nathan yet. She had been waiting for the right moment, some version of a moment that kept failing to materialize because every conversation in this house moved on Evelyn's schedule. And Evelyn's schedule had not included space for Charlotte to be a real person inside her son's marriage. Charlotte stood at the kitchen counter with her tea and looked out the window at the backyard, where the landscapers had already been through and the grass was the particular shade of green that required a dedicated irrigation system and a quarterly chemical treatment. The sun was barely up. The sky over Lake Michigan was the color of old pewter. She thought about calling her father. She thought about it the way you think about something you know you're eventually going to do, but keep postponing because once you make that call, everything changes. Vincent Whitmore was not a complicated man to talk to. He was patient, steady, the kind of man who listened completely before he said anything. But Charlotte had spent 14 months not calling him about any of this, because calling her father meant admitting the full shape of what her life had become inside this house. And she had not been ready to do that. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Evelyn came into the kitchen already dressed, pressed linen trousers, a silk blouse in pale gray, her silver hair set with the rigidity of someone who had been performing composure for so long it had calcified into architecture. She was 61 years old and she moved through her own home like she was conducting an inspection. She looked at Charlotte at the counter. She looked at the tea. She said nothing about the papers, which meant she already knew Charlotte had seen them. "You're up early," Evelyn said, moving to the coffee maker with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had never once asked another person to make her coffee. "Couldn't sleep." "Nathan will be down in an hour. We thought it would be better to have the conversation as a family." Charlotte turned the mug in her hands. The ceramic was warm, and she focused on that, the specific warmth of it against her palms. A family conversation about dissolving the family. That's a dramatic way to put it. It's the accurate way. Evelyn poured her coffee, turned, and leaned against the counter with the cup in both hands. She studied Charlotte with the particular expression she had been using since the first week Charlotte moved in. Not hostile exactly, but appraising. Like Charlotte was a piece of furniture she had agreed to accept but never quite stopped thinking about returning. "Charlotte, You know this has been difficult for everyone. I know it's been difficult for me. That's what I mean. You've never been comfortable here. You've said so yourself. Charlotte had said it once, 8 months ago, in the middle of an argument with Nathan in their bedroom, and she had said it quietly, not as a complaint, but as a fact. The fact that Evelyn knew about it told Charlotte everything she needed to know about the acoustics of privacy in the Harrington house. I wasn't uncomfortable, Charlotte said. I was unwelcome. Those are different things. Evelyn's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. We've tried to include you. You corrected my posture at your dinner table in front of 8 guests. Charlotte's voice stayed level. She was not angry right now. She was something past anger. A cold, clear place she had arrived at somewhere around 3 in the morning while lying awake in the bed she shared with a man who had stopped reaching for her 6 months ago. You told my college roommate that Nathan had settled when he married me. You returned the centerpieces I chose for the holiday party and replaced them without telling me, and then thanked me in front of everyone for the ones you'd picked. I have the emails, Evelyn. I saved all of them. Silence. Evelyn took a sip of her coffee. Her eyes were flat and careful. You've been keeping a record. I've been surviving. More footsteps on the stairs. Nathan came into the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles, day-old stubble, the particular rumpled quality of a man who had been rehearsing something in his head all night and still wasn't ready. He was 32 and handsome in a forgettable way, the kind of face that photographed well at family events, and revealed very little the rest of the time. He looked at Charlotte. He looked at his mother. He poured himself coffee and did not say anything. This was the thing about Nathan Harrington that Charlotte had spent 14 months trying to make peace with and ultimately could not. Not his selfishness, which was moderate and largely unconscious, not his conflict avoidance, which was total and entirely deliberate, but the specific way he deployed his silence. Nathan used silence the way other men used words. He arranged it strategically. He let it expand into whatever shape the room required, and then later, in private, he would tell Charlotte that he had been about to say something, that he had been working up to it, that she needed to give him more time. He had never once, in 14 months, said anything to his mother on Charlotte's behalf. Not once. Charlotte looked at him now. Really looked at him, the way she sometimes did when she was trying to remember who she had thought he was before she understood who he actually was. She had loved him. She wanted that on the record somewhere, even if only in her own head. She had loved him in the beginning with the particular intensity of someone who had spent her whole life in the long shadow of a powerful man and had finally found someone who seemed to exist entirely outside that world. Nathan didn't know who her father was. Charlotte had never told him. She had wanted, just once, to be chosen for herself. She had been chosen. And then she had discovered that being chosen was not the same as being protected. The papers, she said. Nathan looked at his coffee. Nathan. Her voice was not hard. It was just present. The papers. Charlotte, we talked about this. We talked about the fact that things weren't working. We did not talk about lawyers. We did not talk about terms. And we did not talk about a timeline. Those papers were put on that table last night while I was asleep. So I would like you to tell me when that decision was made and by whom. The silence stretched. In the hallway, Charlotte heard another sound, the soft friction of socked feet on hardwood. She turned. Melissa was standing in the kitchen doorway in a university sweatshirt, her phone already in her hand, already angled with the practiced casualness of someone who had been recording for at least 30 seconds. Nathan's younger sister was 24 and worked in marketing and had the specific talent of people who understand that documentation is power before they understand anything else about the world. Charlotte looked at the phone. Then she looked at Melissa. Then she looked back at Nathan. Nathan was looking at his coffee. Put the phone down, Charlotte said. I'm just... Melissa. Flat. Final. Put it down. Melissa lowered the phone maybe 3 inches. The angle changed, but the recording, Charlotte understood, did not stop. Charlotte turned back to the papers on the table. She pulled them toward her and picked up the pen that had been left beside them. A fountain pen, Evelyn's, the kind that cost more than Charlotte's first car. She found a particular irony in that she would not comment on. She began to sign, page by page, line by line. Her handwriting was small and precise, and she did not rush it. She could hear the room breathing. Evelyn with her coffee, Nathan with his silence, Melissa with her phone. The scratch of the pen nib against paper was the loudest sound in the house. She signed the last page. She set the pen down. She squared the papers against the table edge and slid them back to the center. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at Nathan. "I'm pregnant," she said. The room didn't react the way rooms do in films. No sharp intake of breath, no clatter of dropped cups. It went very still. The kind of still that has physical weight. Evelyn's expression did something complicated and then went back to flat. Melissa's phone hand dropped to her side. Nathan looked up from his coffee for the first time since he'd entered the room. He looked at Charlotte with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly, not shock exactly, but something between them, something that didn't have a name because it required being two contradictory things simultaneously. "How long?" he said. 8 weeks. "Why didn't you tell you?" The word sat in the air. "I was going to. I was trying to find the right moment. There is no right moment in a house where I don't have any privacy and my mother-in-law reads my mail." "Charlotte, that's not," Evelyn began. "I wasn't talking to you." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had an edge. Charlotte looked at Nathan. She looked at him and waited, because this was the moment. The real moment, the one that mattered. Everything before this had been a test she hadn't known she was administering, and he had failed it incrementally, one small silence at a time. But this was the test that counted. This was the one where he had to choose, in front of his mother and his sister, and the recording that was still probably happening, whether he was a man or an arrangement. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his mother. Charlotte stood up. She pushed her chair back with a soft scrape and stood, and she did not look at Evelyn, and she did not look at Melissa, and she did not look at the papers she had just signed. She looked at Nathan for one more moment, long enough to be sure, long enough to understand that she had her answer, and it was the same answer she had been getting for 14 months, just finally stripped of its plausible deniability. Then she walked out of the kitchen. She took the stairs at a normal pace. She was not running. She went into the bedroom she had shared with Nathan for over a year, and she pulled her suitcase from the closet, the large one, the one she had brought when she moved in, and she opened it on the bed and began to pack. She was methodical. The things that mattered, her laptop, the leather journal her father had given her when she graduated, the photograph of herself and Vincent taken on the dock of the lake house the summer before she got married, standing side by side in the long afternoon light while her father looked at her like she was something he had been given temporary custody of and was already preparing to be proud of for the rest of his life. She packed clothes. She packed the documents from the fireproof box in the closet. The ones that were hers had always been hers. She packed her grandmother's earrings. She did not pack anything that had been given to her by the Harringtons. Halfway through, she heard Nathan's footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside the door. She could feel him there, the specific weight of his presence just beyond the threshold, and she kept packing. She heard him raise his hand, the soft friction of a knuckle about to knock, and then she heard him lower it again. He did not knock. He stood there for maybe 2 minutes. She counted. Then she heard him walk back down the hall toward the stairs. Charlotte zipped the suitcase. She lifted it off the bed, rolled it to the door, and looked around the room once, not with nostalgia, not searching for things she'd missed, but with the particular clarity of someone doing a final accounting. She carried the suitcase downstairs herself. Evelyn was in the kitchen doorway. Melissa had put the phone away, or at least appeared to have. Nathan was at the bottom of the stairs, and he moved aside when Charlotte reached the landing, stepped back to give her room, which was the most decisive thing he had done all morning. Charlotte rolled the suitcase across the marble foyer. She opened the front door herself. The morning air came in, cold, smelling of lake and wet grass, and the particular freshness of early June in a suburb that spent significant money ensuring its version of nature was maintained. She stepped outside. She pulled the door shut behind her. Not slammed, pulled. The click of the latch was quiet and complete. She stood on the front steps of the Harrington house with her suitcase and her coat and the life she was carrying inside her that no one in that house had said a single word about beyond its use as a variable in their calculations. She took her phone out of her pocket. She found the contact she hadn't called in 3 months. The contact listed simply as Dad, because her father had never required a longer label. She pressed call. It rang twice. "Charlie." His voice was the same as it always was. Unhurried, low, the kind of voice that came from a man who had learned a long time ago that volume was never the thing that made people listen. She said, "Dad?" And then because she had held it for 11 days and 14 months, and the full length of a marriage that had asked her to be smaller than she was, her voice cracked. Just once, just a little, just enough to be honest. "I need to come home." Vincent Whitmore said nothing for a moment. In the background, she could hear what she had always been able to hear when she called him. The faint sound of the city, the particular ambient quality of wherever he happened to be, which was always somewhere specific and never explained. "I'll have Marcus bring the car," he said. "Don't move." She did not ask how he knew she was standing outside. She never asked things like that about her father anymore. She sat down on the top step of the Harrington house with her suitcase beside her and her phone in her lap, and she looked at the manicured street and the identical architectural ambitions of the houses lining it. And she waited. She did not cry again. The car arrived in 11 minutes. A dark blue sedan, nothing ostentatious, the kind of vehicle that could park anywhere in Chicago without drawing a second glance. Marcus, who had been her father's driver for as long as she could remember, and who had picked her up from a middle school dance once and never told her father what time she'd actually left, got out and took her suitcase without a word and put it in the trunk. Charlotte got in the back. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked at the Harrington house through the rear window. The front door was closed. The windows were blank. She looked at it for 3 seconds and then looked away, because there was nothing in that building that required any more of her attention. What she did not know, what she could not have seen from the street, was that Melissa Harrington was already upstairs in her room, sitting on her bed with her phone in her hands, her thumb hovering over the upload button on a 23-second video. She pressed it. By the time Charlotte's car reached the Edens Expressway, the video had 40 views. By the time she crossed into the city limits, it had 400. By the time Marcus pulled up to the gate of her father's property in Lincoln Square, a property that occupied most of a city block behind an unremarkable brick wall and was listed publicly as the offices of Whitmore Capital Holdings, LLC. The video had been viewed 11,000 times and was climbing fast. The comments were mostly what the internet produces when it witnesses a woman being publicly diminished, outrage on her behalf, curiosity about her identity. A small and predictable contingent of people who felt compelled to explain why the family was probably justified. Nobody in the comments section had any idea who Charlotte Whitmore was. Nobody in the comments section had any idea who her father was. Nobody in the comments section understood that somewhere on the other side of that brick wall, a quiet man in a simple jacket was already sitting down with a cup of black coffee, listening to his daughter describe the last 14 months of her life, while his eyes stayed calm and his hands stayed still, and somewhere in the carefully organized infrastructure of his attention, something was being noted and filed and held. Vincent Whitmore let his daughter talk. He did not interrupt. He did not make promises. When she finally finished, when she had told him everything, the miscarriage she'd suffered at 11 weeks 6 months ago that Nathan's family had responded to with an awkward silence and a fruit basket, the social calendar that had replaced her own ambitions, the dinner party where Evelyn had told a table of people that Charlotte had good bones but needed polish, the recorded video this morning, the pregnancy, the signed papers, Nathan's face when she'd told him, and the way he'd looked at his mother. Vincent sat with all of it for a long time. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "I will be." "The baby?" "Healthy. I have an appointment Thursday." "I'll take you." She looked at her father across the kitchen table. This man who looked like someone's quiet uncle, who drove a truck that was 12 years old, who wore the same brand of jacket in 3 different colors, who had never once in her entire life raised his voice at her. And she understood again, as she understood periodically, and always with a particular force, what lay beneath the stillness. Vincent Whitmore was not a violent man. He did not need to be. He had built something over 30 years that did not require him to personally administer its consequences. The Whitmore Syndicate was not a story she knew in detail. Her father had been careful about that, meticulous in keeping the distance between what he was and what she was required to know. But she knew its broad shape the way you know the shape of a mountain you've grown up near without having climbed it. She knew that her father's phone calls were returned immediately. She knew that when Vincent Whitmore sent a letter, it was read. She knew that there were people in this city who had spent significant portions of their lives hoping to never become relevant to her father's attention. She knew that Richard Harrington, Nathan's father, had been doing business with 3 companies for the past 5 years whose beneficial ownership traced through a carefully constructed chain of holding companies and registered agents in Delaware and Nevada, back to Whitmore Capital Holdings, LLC. She had known this for 7 months. She had said nothing about it. She had hoped it would become irrelevant. She looked at her father now and she said, "Don't hurt them." Vincent looked back at her over his coffee cup. "I'm not going to hurt them, Charlie." "I know what that look means." "What look?" "The one you're doing right now, the still one." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. "I'm always still." "Not like this." He set his cup down. He folded his hands on the table. Large hands, careful hands. The hands of a man who had learned early that what he touched either held together or broke apart, and that the difference was usually patience. "They threw away my daughter," he said, "and they did it on camera, and they're going to have to live with that." He paused. "That's all." Charlotte looked at him for a long time. She believed him. That was what terrified the Harrington family. Not that Vincent Whitmore would do something to them, but that he wouldn't have to. Across town, in a glass and steel building on Michigan Avenue that housed the regional offices of Harrington Development Group, Richard Harrington's assistant came into his office at 9:47 in the morning and placed her phone on his desk without a word, open to a video that already had 60,000 views. Richard watched it. He watched his daughter-in-law's face when Evelyn said, "We thought it would be better to have the conversation as a family." He watched Charlotte sign the papers with a steadiness that he recognized, uncomfortably, as a specific kind of controlled fury. He watched the moment Charlotte said the word pregnant and the way the room went quiet. He watched Nathan. Richard Harrington was 64 years old and had built a real estate development company from a single commercial property into a regional operation with 40 employees and projects in 4 states. He understood performance. He understood with the particular acuity of a man who had been performing confidence for 4 decades. The difference between a man who is momentarily speechless and a man who is constitutionally incapable of speaking. His son was the second kind. He handed the phone back to his assistant. He sat back in his chair and turned toward the window and looked at the lake. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was from a Chicago exchange he didn't recognize. He answered it. The voice on the other end said, "Mr. Harrington, my name is Daniel Voss. I'm calling on behalf of Whitmore Capital Holdings. Mr. Whitmore would like to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience." Richard's hand tightened on the phone. "Whitmore Capital," he said. The name was familiar, vaguely, in the way that names in the financial layer of the city were familiar. The names on documents and letterheads and LLC filings that you encountered without examining closely. "What is this regarding?" "Mr. Whitmore prefers to discuss that in person," Daniel Voss said. "He's available tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Richard looked at the lake. He thought about the video. He thought about his son's face in it. The particular blankness of a man who has chosen comfort over character one too many times and finally run out of runway. "Fine," he said. 8 o'clock. He hung up. He sat very still for a moment. Then he opened his browser and searched for Whitmore Capital Holdings, LLC. What he found over the next 40 minutes was, on the surface, not alarming. A capital management firm with a diverse portfolio, real estate, logistics, some hospitality assets, a manufacturing interest out of Indiana, clean financials, a registered address in the Loop, no red flags in the public record. But there was something about the architecture of it, the layers, the careful distribution across holding entities, the way every thread he pulled led to another thread rather than to a person, that reminded him of something. That reminded him of a specific kind of structure he had encountered once, briefly, at a golf event in Scottsdale 8 years ago, where he had been introduced to a man whose name he hadn't fully caught, but whose presence had the quality of weather, ambient, encompassing, something you felt before you understood what you were feeling. He closed his browser. He looked at his phone. He thought about calling Nathan. He decided against it. He thought about calling his lawyer. He decided against that too. He sat at his desk in his glass and steel building on Michigan Avenue, while 60,000 people watched a video of his family on the internet, and he understood, with the slow inevitability of a man who has been building toward a reckoning without knowing it, that tomorrow morning's meeting was going to be the most important conversation of his life. He had no idea yet how right he was. Across town, in the kitchen of the house in Lincoln Square, Charlotte was on her second cup of tea, and her father was on his third call of the morning, speaking in a voice too low for her to hear from where she sat. Outside the window, the city moved the way Chicago moves in early June. Restless, layered, the lake somewhere beyond the rooftops doing what it always did, which was exist at a scale that made everything else seem provisional. Charlotte put her hand flat on the table. She thought about Nathan's face one more time, the last real image of it at the bottom of the stairs, stepping aside to let her pass. The specific quality of that gesture, not cruelty, not indifference, but something more difficult than either. The face of a man who knows what he should do and has chosen, at the decisive moment, to do nothing. She thought about the baby. 8 weeks. The size of a kidney bean, according to the app on her phone that she'd downloaded 2 days after the positive test and checked obsessively at intervals she refused to quantify. A heartbeat. Fingers beginning. A whole system of becoming occurring in the space just below her ribcage, entirely indifferent to the wreckage of the life surrounding it. Her phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. Then another. Then 3 in a row. She turned the phone face down. She looked at her father still on his call in the doorway to the hall, and she thought about what he had said. They threw away my daughter. And the specific way he'd said it. Not with heat, not with the operatic fury that the line deserved, just as a statement of fact. A datum. Something entered into a ledger. She understood that the Harrington family thought this was over. She understood that from their perspective, the papers were signed, the arrangements were in motion, the video was an embarrassment they would eventually outlast. She understood that they had absolutely no idea what they had done, because they had thrown away the daughter of Vincent Whitmore, and Vincent Whitmore remembered everything. Outside, a delivery truck moved slowly down the street. A neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. The city breathed. Inside the house, her father finished his call and came back to the table and poured himself more coffee and sat across from her and looked at her with the expression she had known her whole life. Steady, patient, the expression of a man who had time on his side because he had made sure of it. "You should sleep," he said. "I'm not tired." "Yes, you are." She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing dramatic." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." He picked up his coffee. "Get some sleep, Charlie. Your appointment's Thursday. I'll drive." She looked at her father for a long moment. This quiet, ordinary-looking man who controlled an empire from behind the architecture of complete stillness, and she thought about the 14 months she had spent in a house that did not want her, waiting for a man to choose her, swallowing herself one measured silence at a time. She thought about the video with its climbing view count. She thought about Richard Harrington's phone, which had just rung. She thought about tomorrow morning. She pushed back from the table. She said, "Good night, Dad." Even though it was barely noon, he said, "Good night, Charlie." She walked down the hall to her old room, still her room, still exactly as she'd left it, because her father had never changed it, had never repurposed it, had left it available with the quiet certainty of a man who knew his daughter would eventually need it back. She lay down on the bed without changing her clothes. She stared at the ceiling. She was 28 years old, newly signed off on a marriage, 8 weeks pregnant, and in the room next to the one where the most dangerous man in Chicago's underground was finishing his coffee. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. This time it was a number she recognized. Nathan. She looked at it ring. She counted the rings, 4, 5, 6, and then it went to voicemail. She set the phone back down. She closed her eyes. Outside, the city moved. The lake held its position. And somewhere across town, in a glass office on Michigan Avenue, Richard Harrington was about to pick up his phone and call his son to tell him what he had just discovered about the company that owned the 3 most important contracts in his business portfolio. And Nathan Harrington, sitting in his car in the driveway of his mother's house, was about to learn that the woman he had watched walk out the door this morning was not who he had believed her to be, and that the silence he had chosen, the one he had been choosing incrementally for 14 months, had just become the most expensive decision of his life. Nathan Harrington sat in his car in the driveway for 40 minutes. He didn't go inside. He didn't call anyone back. He just sat there with the engine off and his phone in his lap, and the particular stillness of a man who has just watched the architecture of his own life develop a visible crack and is trying to determine through pure force of inaction whether it might close on its own. It wouldn't. He knew that. He had known it since 6:53 this morning when Charlotte said the word pregnant in a voice so level it had the quality of something being read from a document. But knowing a thing and being willing to act on it were two different categories of experience for Nathan, had always been, and the gap between them was where most of his life had quietly happened. His phone buzzed. His mother. He let it go. It buzzed again. His mother again. He picked up. "You need to come inside," Evelyn said. Her voice was controlled in the way it always was when she was not controlled at all. Each word placed precisely, the pauses between them measured. "I'm in the driveway." "I know where you are, Nathan. Come inside." He got out of the car. The house looked the same as it always did. The white brick, the black shutters, the flower beds that the landscaping service maintained on a bi-weekly rotation. It looked like the kind of house that appeared in the backgrounds of insurance commercials. It had never, in Nathan's entire experience of it, looked like a place where anything had consequences. He went inside. His mother was in the sitting room off the main hallway, the one with the blue chairs that nobody ever sat in because they were decorative, and she was sitting in one of them now, which told him something about the state she was in. Melissa was on the couch with her knees pulled up and her phone, mercifully, face down on the cushion beside her. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "I'll stand." Her jaw set. "Nathan, how many views?" Silence. "Melissa?" He looked at his sister. "How many?" Melissa picked up her phone. She looked at the screen. She said, 82,000. And her voice had the quality of someone reporting a weather event, trying to stay factual to avoid being adjacent to the feeling. Nathan looked at the ceiling. The plasterwork up there was original to the house. He knew this because his mother had mentioned it approximately 400 times. Intricate, expensive, completely useless. He looked at it the way you look at something when you're trying to find a neutral surface for your eyes, while your brain does something it doesn't want to be watched doing. "Take it down," he said. "I can't take it down," Melissa said. "It's been shared. Nathan, it's on 3 different platforms now. Someone screenshotted the comments and posted those separately. There's a Reddit thread." "What does the Reddit thread say?" "That Charlotte is... They're saying she handled it with a lot of dignity, and that..." She stopped. "And that what?" "That you didn't." The room held that. Evelyn uncrossed and recrossed her legs. She was wearing the pale gray blouse from this morning, and there was a small, precise tension in her shoulders that Nathan recognized as the physical signature of his mother trying to manage something she could not manage. He had seen it twice before in his life. Once when his father left, once when the development company had a bad year and they'd had to sell the lake house. Both times she had compressed herself into a smaller, harder shape and moved through it by sheer controlled momentum. "We need to discuss the pregnancy," Evelyn said. "The pregnancy." Nathan said it back to her flatly. "That's what we're leading with. It changes the legal situation, the settlement terms. Mom." His voice came out with an edge he hadn't planned for. "Charlotte is pregnant. That's a person. That's a child. You're talking about it like it's a line item. I'm talking about it like someone has to. Someone has to." He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. It was the sound a laugh makes when it's been hollowed out and turned inside out. He walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. The early afternoon sun doing what it did in this neighborhood, which was illuminate everything evenly and without shadow. "She told me 8 weeks. 8 weeks ago. She's been carrying that for 8 weeks and she was going to tell me and then..." He stopped. Put his hand on the window frame. The wood was cool under his palm. "She was going to tell me, and I never..." "You couldn't have known," Evelyn said. "I could have been paying attention." The words sat in the room. Melissa had gone very still on the couch. She was 24, and she had the particular quality of young people who are witnessing something they caused and are now unable to stop watching. A paralysis that was equal parts guilt and compulsion. "She's not answering," Nathan said, more to himself than to either of them. I called 4 times. Give her time. Time. He turned from the window. Mom, I watched her sign divorce papers this morning, and she had more composure than anyone else in this room has ever had about anything, and I stood there. And I didn't say anything. I looked at you. He said the last part like it cost him something specific. I looked at you. Why did I look at you? Evelyn's chin came up. I'm your mother. She was my wife. Was. The tense of it landed hard. Nathan heard himself use it and felt it settle in his chest like something dropped from a height. She'll come back, Evelyn said. When she's had time to process. She took a suitcase. 1 suitcase. She didn't take anything we gave her. I went upstairs after she left. Her jewelry box is half empty, and what's gone is the stuff she had before. Everything from the family, it's still there. She left it, all of it. He paused. She wasn't packing to make a point, Mom. She was packing because she already decided. Silence. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not regret exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it, the shadow that arrives before the thing itself. Where did she go? Evelyn said. I don't know. She must have family. You've met her father. Once, Nathan said. At the engagement dinner. He tried to remember. A quiet man. Average height, average build, wore a plain dark jacket. Shook his hand with a grip that was firm without being demonstrative. Said he was glad Nathan loved his daughter. Said it simply. Didn't elaborate. He seemed normal. What does he do? She always said he was in investments, private equity, something like that. She was vague about it. I never pushed. He stopped. A thought surfaced. She was always vague about her family. All of it. Where she grew up, where her money came from. She had money when we met, her own, but she never explained it. I thought she was private. I thought it was... His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His father. He stepped out of the sitting room into the hallway and answered. Nathan. Richard's voice had a quality Nathan didn't hear often, a stripped quality, like a signal with all the noise removed. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Dad, I know about the video. This isn't about the video. Charlotte's last name. Whitmore, her father's name. Nathan's hand tightened on the phone. Vincent Whitmore. Why? The pause that followed lasted 4 seconds. Nathan counted because the silence had a texture that made counting seem like the only available response. I got a call this morning, Richard said, from a man named Daniel Voss. Said he was calling on behalf of Whitmore Capital Holdings. Wants a meeting tomorrow, 8 in the morning. Whitmore Capital. Nathan said the name slowly. I looked them up. They own controlling interests in 3 logistics companies we've been contracted through for the past 5 years. Fletcher Distribution, Meridian Freight, and the holding company behind the Lakeside retail development. Nathan was quiet. That's 40% of our active revenue, Nathan. 40%. Running through companies that belong to Charlotte's father. The hallway was very still. Down the hall, through the open doorway, Nathan could see the edge of the blue chair where his mother was sitting and the precise angle of her spine and the way her hands were folded in her lap. And he understood that he was looking at a woman who had spent his entire life being certain about everything and who was about to find out what happened when certainty met something larger than itself. He didn't know, Nathan said. Not a question. He meant himself. I didn't know. Neither did I. A pause. Did Charlotte know? Nathan thought about this carefully. He thought about all the moments in 14 months when Charlotte had gone quiet in particular ways, not the easy quiet of a comfortable person, but the deliberate quiet of someone making a choice not to say a thing they were aware of. He thought about the times he had tried to talk to her about his father's business, and she had listened with an attention that now, retroactively, rearranged itself into something more specific than general interest. I don't know, he said. If she knew, Richard said, and said nothing, then she was protecting us. Nathan leaned against the wall. The plaster was smooth and cool behind his shoulder blades. Down the hall, the decorative clock his mother had bought at an estate auction in Lake Forest clicked through another minute. She was protecting us, he said quietly, while we were... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I'll call you after the meeting tomorrow, Richard said. Nathan? A pause. The stripped quality in his father's voice shifted into something that Richard Harrington almost never deployed. Something direct and without management. What happened this morning? The video. I watched it. Dad, you need to fix this. She's not answering. Then find another way. But you need to fix it, not for the business, because she is carrying your child and you watched her walk out the door, and you did not say one word. Another pause. I raised you better than that. I think I raised you better than that. He hung up. Nathan stood in the hallway for a while. Then he went back into the sitting room. His mother was still in the blue chair. Melissa was still on the couch. They both looked at him with the expectant quality of people waiting for a leadership decision, which struck him as deeply, specifically absurd, given that he had just spent the morning demonstrating a comprehensive inability to lead anything, including his own instincts. I need Charlotte's father's contact information, he said. Evelyn frowned. You want to call her father? She's not answering me. Maybe he will. Nathan, I don't think that's wise. I'm not asking if it's wise. I'm asking if we have a number. Melissa was already looking at her phone. There's nothing in the group chat from the engagement. She gave us a contact number for her, but not for him. He wasn't... She scrolled. He didn't come to the wedding. She said he had a health thing. Nathan looked at his sister. He didn't come to the wedding. She said, I know what she said. He had accepted it at the time, Charlotte's explanation. Her father had a minor cardiac event in April. He was taking it easy. He was sorry. He sent his love. And he had accepted it without pushing because pushing was not a thing Nathan did. And he understood now with a clarity that felt like a diagnosis that the reason he had never questioned anything Charlotte told him about her father was that some part of him, some carefully maintained zone of comfortable ignorance, had not wanted to know. He sat down. Not in the blue chair. On the floor, actually. Back against the couch, legs stretched out. It was an undignified posture for this room, and he found he didn't care. His mother looked at him with something that might have been alarm. The video, he said to Melissa, without looking up. What are people saying about her? Charlotte, specifically. Melissa hesitated. Tell me. They're calling her. There are a lot of comments. Most of them are about how she handled it, how calm she was. Someone did a frame-by-frame analysis of her face during the signing and wrote this whole, they're saying she was in shock but hiding it. Someone else is saying she wasn't in shock at all, that she knew exactly what she was doing and had planned it. A pause. There's a lot of speculation about who she is. Her name is in the comments. Someone looked up her social media, but she hasn't posted in 8 months, and before that it was all... She was careful about what she shared. She was always careful, Nathan said. Someone also found a LinkedIn. It says she used to work for a design consultancy before she... Melissa stopped. Before she quit to be a Harrington wife. Melissa put the phone down. Nathan, it's fine. Keep going. The biggest thread right now is people trying to figure out who her family is. Because of her composure. Someone wrote that you don't stay that calm unless you know you have a landing place. That nobody signs divorce papers with that energy unless they know something everyone else in the room doesn't. Melissa paused. It's at 114,000 views. Evelyn stood up. She stood with the deliberate quality of a woman reassembling her architecture. Shoulders back, chin level. The visible act of recollecting herself after something had moved through and rearranged things. She walked to the window. I want to call Charlotte, she said. Nathan looked at her. I know she won't answer, but I want to call her. She said it without the usual layering of social purpose. Not strategy, not management. Something else. Something that might, in a different light, be recognized as the first rough draft of accountability. I want to tell her that the things I said in this house, the dinner party, the comments, I want to say that I know. She won't answer, Nathan said again. I know. Evelyn had her back to the room. I'll leave a message. She took out her phone. She found Charlotte's number. She pressed call and waited, and Nathan watched his mother's reflection in the window, the way she stood while it rang, 3 times, 4, and then voicemail, and the way she paused at the beep. Charlotte, her voice, directed at the voicemail, was a slightly different instrument than the voice she used in conversation. Less finished, the edges more visible. "This is Evelyn. I want to say that I'm sorry. I know that this is..." A pause. "I know that sorry is not sufficient. I know that. But I want you to know that I've seen the video, and I understand how it looks because it is how it is, and I..." Another pause, longer. "I hope you're somewhere safe, and I hope you'll give us a chance to..." She stopped. She stood very still at the window. "Please call Nathan back, that's all. Please call Nathan back." She hung up. She did not turn around. Nathan looked at his hands. Melissa looked at the floor. The house was quiet in the expensive, sealed way it always was. And in that quiet, Nathan Harrington began to understand the specific shape of what he had lost. Not in the abstract, not as a concept, but in the granular, visceral specificity of a woman he had watched sign her name 8 times on consecutive pages with a fountain pen that belonged to his mother, in a room full of people who loved him and not her, while she was carrying his child and he had done nothing. He thought about Thursday, Charlotte's appointment Thursday. Her father had said he would take her. He thought about Vincent Whitmore. He thought about what his father had said about the contracts, about the companies, about 40% of active revenue flowing through entities owned by a man who had just listened to his daughter describe 14 months of a marriage that Nathan could not defend. He thought about the engagement dinner, Vincent's handshake, the way he had looked at Nathan across the table, not with the assessing look of a father evaluating a potential son-in-law, but with something steadier, something that was doing something more patient than evaluation. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Chicago area code. He stared at it. It buzzed again. He answered. The voice on the other end was quiet. Not threatening, not warm either. Something more neutral than either, something that had no temperature at all. "Nathan," the voice said, "my name is Daniel Voss. I work for Vincent Whitmore." A pause. "Mr. Whitmore wanted me to let you know that Charlotte arrived home safely this morning." Nathan's hand tightened on the phone. "Is she..." "She's resting. She's fine." Voss's voice remained at that precise neutral register. "Mr. Whitmore also wanted to extend an invitation. He'll be meeting with your father tomorrow at 8. He'd like you to attend as well." "He wants me there." "He does." "Why?" The pause that followed was brief but specific. The pause of a man reading from a prepared answer rather than formulating one. "Mr. Whitmore believes that some conversations are more productive when all relevant parties are present." Nathan looked at the wall, at the plasterwork his mother liked, at the clock. "Tell him I'll be there," Nathan said. 8 o'clock. The Whitmore Capital offices. I'll send the address." Voss hung up. Nathan lowered the phone. He sat for a long moment in the sitting room of his mother's house, in the late afternoon light coming through the windows, in the specific silence that follows the moment when a door you didn't know was open suddenly closes. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. He was going to sit across a table from his wife's father and try to explain himself, and he understood with complete bone-level clarity that there was no explanation that would be sufficient, because sufficient was not the point. The point, the thing Vincent Whitmore wanted him to understand, Nathan felt it already, felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives, was not punishment. It was something harder than punishment. It was the requirement to sit in a room, and the Whitmore Capital offices occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Walker Drive that most people walked past without registering. That was intentional. The lobby was understated in the specific way that serious money is always understated. Clean lines, dark stone, a reception desk staffed by a woman in her 40s who looked at you with the particular attention of someone who had been trained to assess threat levels without appearing to do so. No artwork on the walls except one piece, large, abstract, the kind that cost more than most people's houses and revealed nothing about the person who bought it. Richard Harrington arrived at 7:54. Nathan arrived at 7:57. They did not speak in the elevator. They had not spoken much since Nathan got into his father's car outside the house in Winnetka. The drive into the city had been 26 minutes of radio news and the sound of the expressway and Richard's hands on the wheel at a precise 10 and 2 that communicated everything about his internal state by communicating nothing at all. The elevator opened onto a hallway. Daniel Voss was waiting, mid-30s, trim, a face built for anonymity. He shook their hands with professional economy and led them down the hallway without small talk. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows on the north side. Chicago spread out below it, the river, the bridges, the grid of streets running toward the lake. It was a view that was designed to establish something before a word was spoken. Vincent Whitmore was already seated. He was at the head of the table, and he looked exactly as Nathan remembered him from the engagement dinner 2 years ago. The plain dark jacket, the simple watch, the quality of stillness that Nathan had registered then as reserve, and was now, in this light, with this context, forced to recategorize into something without a comfortable name. He had a cup of coffee in front of him. He was not looking at his phone or at any documents. He was just sitting there, looking at the door. The way a man looks at a door when he knew exactly what was going to come through it and had already decided how he felt about it. He looked at Nathan first, not with anger, not with the performing fury that Nathan had been bracing himself against for the last 14 hours. Just looked. The way you look at something you are in the process of fully understanding. Then he looked at Richard. "Sit down," Vincent said. They sat. Voss closed the door from the outside. There was no one else in the room, no lawyers, no assistants, no witnesses of any official kind. Richard put his hands on the table. He was 64 years old, and he had been in negotiating rooms his entire professional life, had built a company in rooms like this, had eaten men twice his size for lunch in rooms like this, and he was sitting now with the particular posture of a man who has entered a room and understood immediately that the room is not what he prepared for. "Mr. Whitmore," Richard said, "I want to say before anything else that what happened yesterday morning in my home—" "I know what happened," Vincent said. "I understand, but I want to be clear that the video, that was not sanctioned. That was not something Mr. Harrington," Vincent's voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that functions as a volume control on the room. "I'm not here to discuss the video." Richard stopped. "I'm here," Vincent said, "because my daughter spent 14 months in your house, and I want to understand something." He picked up his coffee, set it down. The gesture was entirely controlled, entirely without agitation. "How did you allow that to happen?" The question landed without accusation in its tone, which made it worse. It was asked with the genuine curiosity of a man who had reviewed the evidence and found the conclusion genuinely puzzling. Richard opened his mouth. Nathan spoke first. "We didn't see it." His voice was rough. He hadn't slept. His eyes felt like they had sand in them, and his chest had been carrying a specific compression since yesterday morning that he hadn't been able to locate or relieve. "That's the honest answer. We didn't see what we were doing to her because we weren't looking." Vincent looked at him. "I'm not saying that as an excuse," Nathan said. "I'm saying it because I think you deserve an accurate answer more than a managed one." A pause. "You signed the papers," Vincent said. Not to Nathan. He was looking at Nathan, but the statement had a broader address. The papers were my mother's." Nathan, the name, said quietly, stopped him. "You signed the papers. Last night. Your signature is on the filing." Nathan's face went still. He looked at the table. A very specific thing was happening in his chest. Not surprise exactly, because some part of him had been tracking the logic of this all night, had been following the thread of it while he lay awake staring at a ceiling. But the arrival of it as a spoken fact in a room with Charlotte's father across the table from him had a different weight than the private carrying of it. "My mother," he started, "filed them," Vincent said. "Yes. Her attorney filed them at 8:45 yesterday morning, 45 minutes after Charlotte left the house, before Charlotte had been gone an hour." He paused. "I want you to think about that timeline." Nathan thought about it. 45 minutes. The papers had been prepared in advance. Of course they had. He'd known that, had known it the moment he saw them on the table, had filed that knowledge in the part of his brain reserved for things he was not ready to examine. But filed within 45 minutes of Charlotte's departure meant filed the moment she was gone, which meant his mother had been waiting, specifically waiting, for Charlotte to leave so the paperwork could move, which meant the conversation yesterday morning had not been an intervention. It had been an execution. Charlotte had walked into a conclusion, not a confrontation. "She didn't know," Nathan said. The words came out abraded. She thought she was walking into a... He stopped. His hand on the table had closed into something close to a fist without him deciding to make it do that. She thought there was still a conversation to be had. Yes, Vincent said. And I... He couldn't finish it. He looked at the window. The city below, indifferent, continuous. I knew the papers were there. I knew my mother had prepared them. She told me 3 days ago. She said she'd had her lawyer draw them up as a precaution, just in case, just to have them ready. I told her I wasn't sure. I told her to give me more time. He paused. I didn't tell Charlotte. The room sat with that. Richard was very still beside him. Nathan could feel his father's presence as a kind of weight. The weight of a man reconfiguring something rapidly and not enjoying the process. You knew, Richard said. Low. To Nathan. Not a question. I knew they existed. Nathan. His father's voice had a quality Nathan had heard maybe 3 times in his life. Stripped of management, stripped of the professional coating that Richard Harrington wore like a second skin. Raw underneath. You let her walk in there not knowing. I thought... He stopped. What had he thought? He had thought that if the papers were on the table and Charlotte saw them, she might... He had thought that maybe Charlotte would fight, would push back hard enough that his mother would recalibrate, would force a confrontation that Nathan did not know how to initiate himself. He understood now, using Charlotte's potential reaction as a tool for managing his mother. He had been hoping his wife's shock would do the work he couldn't do. He had used her. The understanding of that settled into him like something physical. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. His own hands. Ordinary, familiar, and felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the coffee he hadn't eaten breakfast before drinking. Vincent was watching him. She knew, Nathan said. Not about the papers. He meant something else. He looked up at Vincent. She knew about the businesses, the contracts, Fletcher, Meridian, the Lakeside Holding. She knew they were yours. Vincent didn't confirm or deny it. He just waited. How long? Nathan said. 7 months, Vincent said. She found a document in the house, a contract renewal. She recognized the holding company name because she'd heard me mention it years ago. A pause. She called me. She asked me if it was mine. I told her the truth. And she said nothing. Nathan's voice was barely above a level. To us. She said nothing for 7 months. She was protecting you, Vincent said. The same words Richard had used last night on the phone, but in Vincent's mouth they had a different texture. Not gentle, not reproachful, just the fact of it, stated with the same neutrality he brought to everything. She didn't want your father's business compromised. She didn't want the pregnancy complicated by financial pressure. She made a decision to carry it quietly and deal with it after. Richard exhaled. It was a long, controlled exhale, the kind that takes effort because the alternative is something louder. He put his hand over his mouth briefly, removed it. She protected us, he said. Actively. While Evelyn was... He stopped. While your wife, Vincent said without inflection, was telling a dinner table that Charlotte needed polish. The silence after that was long. Richard looked at the table. There's something else, Vincent said. He reached to the side and pulled a folder from the credenza behind him. Plain manila, nothing on the tab. He set it on the table but didn't open it. 7 weeks ago, Vincent said, Charlotte had a conversation with her doctor. The pregnancy was confirmed. She made an appointment. She also, during that appointment, mentioned some symptoms she'd been experiencing. Headaches, elevated blood pressure, some swelling. He paused. Her doctor ran additional tests. The results came back in stages. The last results came back 4 days ago. Nathan felt the compression in his chest move, shift upward, change location. What results? Charlotte has a condition called gestational hypertension with early markers for preeclampsia, Vincent said. Her doctor has her on a monitoring protocol. It's manageable, but it requires reduced stress, consistent care, and close observation through the remainder of the pregnancy. He looked at Nathan with that same even gaze. She found out 4 days ago, 3 days before you filed the papers. Nathan heard this. He heard it, and something happened behind his eyes. A kind of white, pressureless clarity that comes after the threshold of a certain kind of pain. He thought about Charlotte at the kitchen table 4 days ago. He tried to remember what 4 days ago had looked like. Tuesday. It had been a Tuesday. And he remembered she had been quiet at dinner, quieter than usual. And he had assumed she was tired and had not asked, had turned on the television and let the quiet sit there between them. And she had been sitting across from him with a diagnosis in her body, and he had watched TV. She didn't tell me, Nathan said. No. Because he had to stop. His throat had done something. He controlled it. Because she didn't trust the information would be safe. In that house. He couldn't say his mother's name right now. She was protecting the pregnancy from stress. She was protecting herself and the baby from your family, Vincent said, simply, without cruelty. Nathan looked at the folder. I'm not showing you her medical records, Vincent said. That's her information. I'm telling you what she told me because she gave me permission to tell you, in this room, so that you would understand the full weight of what the timeline means. He paused. She found out she had a high-risk pregnancy, and 3 days later she was sitting at a table signing papers while someone recorded her on a phone. Richard made a sound. It was quiet, and it was brief, and it was the sound of a man who has just had the complete picture assemble itself for the first time and found it unbearable. Richard started, stopped. He looked at Vincent with an expression that Nathan had never seen on his father's face, not in 43 years of knowing this man. It was unguarded in a way that was almost physical, like something structural had given way. What do we do? Tell me what you need us to do, and we will do it. Vincent looked at him for a moment. That's Charlotte's decision, he said, not mine. But you could... No. Not harsh, just final. I don't make decisions for my daughter. I haven't made decisions for her since she was 17 years old. She is 28, and she is the most capable person I know, and what happens next is entirely up to her. A pause. What you can do, what I'm telling you you need to do, is be ready for whatever she decides. If she decides she wants nothing from your family, you accept that with whatever grace you can find. If she decides she wants Nathan involved in the child's life, you support that without conditions or commentary. He looked at Evelyn's absence in the room with the specific awareness of a man who notices what isn't there. All of you. My mother, Nathan said. Your mother will receive a separate conversation, Vincent said. She asked to meet with me. He said it without elaboration, and the absence of elaboration was its own information. Nathan looked at the folder on the table, the plain manila, nothing on the tab. Can I... He stopped. Tried again. Is Charlotte here in the building? No. Will she... Nathan... Vincent's voice had not changed in register or temperature across the entire conversation, and it didn't change now. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. He folded his hands on the table, the large, careful hands. My daughter hid her background from you because she wanted to be loved for herself. She spent 14 months in that house being made smaller, being made to feel like a guest in her own marriage, and she carried it quietly because she is stubborn and proud, and she had decided you were worth it. A pause. She was wrong about that. Not because of who you are fundamentally, but because of who you chose to be, repeatedly, when the choice was available to you. Another pause. I'm not telling you this to punish you. I'm telling you because you need to understand what you're trying to recover from. It's not one morning. It's 14 months of one morning every day. The room was very still. Nathan looked at his hands. He thought about Charlotte at that kitchen table. The pen moving across each page, the straightness of her spine. The way she had looked at him after that one long look before she walked out. He understood now that she had not been waiting for him to stop her. She had been giving him one last chance to be the person she had originally believed he was. And he had stepped aside. He had literally stepped aside and given her room to leave. His phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He glanced down, reflex, and saw it was Melissa, and he reached to silence it, and then he saw the text preview on the screen and his hand stopped moving. The text read, Nathan, call me right now. Mom did something. She contacted a lawyer about custody. He read it twice. He looked up at Vincent. Vincent was watching him with the stillness he'd had since before they'd entered the room. "Your mother," Vincent said, "filed a consultation request this morning with a family attorney. 40 minutes ago." He said it the way he said everything, as information, as fact, without performance. Regarding the legal status of an unborn child and the potential parental rights of the Harrington family, Nathan felt something go cold in him. Not the compressed grief of the last 24 hours. Something different. Something that started in the base of his spine and moved upward with a precision that felt almost mechanical. She filed... He couldn't frame the sentence properly. Charlotte isn't even... The divorce isn't finalized. The baby... The consultation, Vincent said, is exploratory. It hasn't resulted in anything actionable yet. He looked at Nathan steadily. Yet, Richard had gone the color of old concrete beside him. Evelyn did this. Not a question. A statement with a particular quality. The quality of a man hearing the full measure of a mistake he co-created without understanding its dimensions. "Your mother," Vincent said to Nathan, "loves you. I believe that without reservation, but she is trying to control an outcome she has already lost, and in doing so she is pointing legal instruments at my daughter's pregnancy." He paused. The pause had weight. "I want you to understand what I am telling you right now. I am a patient man. I have been patient across this entire situation in ways that I want you to appreciate, but there are boundaries." He looked at Nathan, then at Richard, then back to Nathan. "This is a boundary." Nathan was already standing. He didn't decide to stand. His body made the decision, and he was upright before the cognitive process caught up with the physical one. His chair scraped back against the polished floor. "I need to call her," he said. "My mother. I need to—" "Sit down," Vincent said. The two words were quiet. Nathan sat down. "You're not going to call your mother in my conference room," Vincent said. "You're going to sit here and you're going to finish this conversation. And then you're going to leave and you're going to handle your family." A pause. "And Nathan, when you speak to your mother, make it clear to her, with whatever authority you have left in that house, that if she pursues any legal action regarding Charlotte's pregnancy or parental rights, she will not find me patient anymore." The last sentence was delivered in the same quiet register as everything else. It did not need volume. It filled the room completely. Richard put both hands flat on the table. He looked at Vincent Whitmore, this ordinary-looking man in his plain jacket with his cup of coffee and his folder and his stillness, and he understood fully and finally the shape of what he had been adjacent to for the past 5 years without knowing it, the architecture of it, the scope. He had been building his business, growing his contracts, managing his quarterly projections, while running 40% of his revenue through the holdings of a man whose daughter, his wife, had been systematically diminishing in their own dining room. "Mr. Whitmore," Richard said. His voice was level because he was making it level, which was not the same thing as it being level naturally. "I want to assure you that Evelyn acted without my knowledge, or Richard." For the first time, Vincent used the first name. "I know you didn't know. That's not the problem." He looked at him with the patient, encompassing attention that had been his primary instrument all morning. "The problem is that you built a life in which that kind of thing can happen without your knowledge. In your house. With your name on the door." He paused. "That's something only you can fix." Richard looked at the table. He was 64 years old. He had built things. He had worked with a consistency and a discipline that he had always considered the central fact of his character. He sat now in a room with a man whose power was of a different and less visible order, and he felt something he had not felt since he was young and starting out and not yet certain that anything he built would hold. He felt afraid. Not of Vincent, not of consequence, not of the business implications, not of the 40%. He felt afraid of the version of himself that had allowed the last 14 months to happen inside his house, and called it family dynamics and moved on. Nathan had his phone in his hand. He was looking at Melissa's text. His face had the particular quality of a man processing something that has just rearranged his understanding of what he is capable of, not in a heroic direction. His mother had moved toward Charlotte's pregnancy with a legal instrument. His mother had done that. While Charlotte was in her first trimester. While Charlotte was managing a blood pressure condition her doctor was monitoring. While Charlotte was sleeping in her father's house in Lincoln Square, after signing papers with a fountain pen that belonged to Evelyn. Nathan left the Whitmore Capitol building at 9:17 in the morning and called his mother before he reached the elevator. She didn't answer. He called again in the lobby. The woman at the reception desk watched him with professional neutrality as he stood by the dark stone wall with the phone pressed to his ear and his jaw set at an angle that was doing a lot of structural work. Voicemail. He texted Melissa. "Where is she?" Melissa replied in under 10 seconds. "Home." "She knows you were at the meeting." "Nathan." "She's been on the phone with the lawyer for the last hour." He pushed through the building's front door into the morning air. Chicago in June, the river smell, the diesel from the delivery trucks on Walker, the particular weight of city air that has nowhere to go. His father came out behind him. Richard said, "I'll drive." "I'll take a cab." "Nathan, I need to be alone for 12 minutes. He was already moving toward the curb. "I'll meet you there." He got into a cab and gave the Winnetka address, and then sat in the back seat and looked at his phone and did not look at the city moving past the windows, because if he looked at the city, he would have to feel the full size of it, and he was not ready for that yet. He thought about his mother. He had been thinking about his mother in increments for the last 24 hours, processing her in the way you process something large by taking small pieces of it and examining them separately, because the whole of it assembled is too much to hold. The dinner party comments. The returned centerpieces. The recording. The papers filed 45 minutes after Charlotte walked out the door. And now this, a custody consultation against Charlotte's pregnancy. While Charlotte was in her first trimester with elevated blood pressure and a monitoring protocol and a condition that her doctor was managing and that required specifically the reduction of stress, his mother had done that. His mother, who loved him, who had built her entire post-divorce life around the architecture of this family. The house, the social calendar, the Harrington name as a structural element she maintained with the dedication of a conservationist. His mother, who had held him when he was sick and attended every school event and called him every Sunday for 32 years, and who had, alongside all of that, spent 14 months making his wife feel like an intruder in her own marriage. Both things were true simultaneously. He was learning that both things could be true simultaneously and that this was not a paradox that resolved itself into something more comfortable with time. It just stayed both things. It stayed complicated and it stayed true, and you had to live with it at that size. The cab pulled up to the house at 9:41. He paid. He got out. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the white brick and the black shutters and the flower beds and the architectural performance of a life that was managed at every surface. He went inside without knocking because it was not a thing he did. It was his mother's house, but he had a key, and had always had a key, and had walked in and out his whole life with the ease of a man who has never had to ask permission in a space. Evelyn was in the kitchen. She heard him come in and she turned from the counter, and her face did the thing it did when she was caught in the middle of composing herself. A fraction of a second where the underlying state was visible before the managed version arrived to replace it. She was in different clothes from yesterday, a cream blouse, her hair done, the full performance of normalcy assembled on a morning that had not earned it. "Nathan," she moved to the coffee maker. "Sit down, Don't make coffee, Mom." She stopped. He walked to the kitchen table and pulled out a chair and sat down and put his phone face up on the table between them and looked at her. Not with heat, with something colder than heat and more sustained. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She sat across from him in the chair where Charlotte had sat 2 mornings ago and folded her hands on the table and arranged her face into the expression of a woman who has been through difficult conversations before and survived them by being more composed than the other person. "The lawyer," Nathan said, "I was exploring options. You filed a custody consultation against Charlotte's pregnancy." It was exploratory, Nathan. It was simply a question of what our rights might be as she's 28 weeks from delivering a baby. His voice came out flat, and it stayed flat because the alternative was not something he was willing to do in this kitchen. "She has a blood pressure condition. Her doctor has her on a monitoring protocol. And you called a lawyer about her unborn child." Evelyn's hands tightened on the table. "I called a lawyer because I'm trying to protect this family's interests." "What family?" The 2 words came out quiet, and they had the quality of something dropped from a height. The pause before the landing. "Charlotte is the mother of my child, That child is this family's interest. There is no version of this where what you did this morning is protective. Nathan, you don't understand what happens in these situations. Women in her position, with her father's resources, they can make it very difficult for the father to... Her father. He looked at his mother. Mom, I just spent an hour in a room with Vincent Whitmore. He paused. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I sat across a table from him and he told me, quietly, without raising his voice, without making a single threat, that if you pursue legal action regarding Charlotte's pregnancy, he will not be patient anymore. He paused again. Those were his words. He will not be patient anymore. Evelyn's face did something. The composed surface of it moved, not broke, not collapsed, but registered something, a change in pressure. He's trying to intimidate us, she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Not all. Some. No, Nathan said. That's the thing, Mom. He's not. He's been not intimidating us for the last 48 hours while we have done everything possible to deserve intimidation. He told Dad to keep his contracts. He told us nobody was being punished. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what that is? That's not weakness. That's a man who is so certain of his position that he doesn't need to demonstrate it. He looked at her. And you called a lawyer this morning. The kitchen was quiet. Melissa appeared in the doorway, and Nathan looked at her and shook his head once, and she stopped where she was, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her face doing something complicated. Evelyn looked at the table. Her hands were still folded, but the pressure in them was visible. The tendons in the back of her hands slightly raised, the knuckles carrying more color than usual. I was trying to help, she said. I know. I was trying to make sure that this family... I know, Mom. His voice had dropped. Not soft, just reduced, the way a flame reduces when the oxygen changes. I know you love me. I know you've been trying to hold this together since Dad left, and I know that this house and this name and everything you've built around it is... I know what it means to you. He looked at her. But Charlotte was my wife. She was pregnant in your house, and you filed divorce papers 45 minutes after she walked out the door. She had a medical diagnosis, and she couldn't tell me because she didn't trust that information would be safe here. He stopped, breathed. That happened, in this house, with your name on it. Evelyn looked up. Her eyes, when they met his, had something in them that Nathan had not seen in them in a very long time, maybe ever, in the precise form it was taking now. Not tears. Evelyn Harrington did not cry in kitchens, but something adjacent to it. Something that was what happens to the face when the internal infrastructure that keeps certain emotions away from the surface has to work harder than it's built for. She was going to leave anyway, Evelyn said. It came out quieter than she intended, almost to herself. The marriage wasn't... Maybe, Nathan said. Maybe it wasn't. But that was between me and Charlotte. And instead of that being something we worked through or didn't, instead of it being ours, you made it something else. He looked at his hands on the table. His father's hands, he sometimes thought. The same shape. You made her prove herself for 14 months, and she never could have proved herself because the standard kept moving. And she knew it kept moving, and she stayed anyway. Because she loved me. He paused. And I let it happen. The last sentence cost him something visible. Something moved across his face and then went still. I let it happen, he said again. Not to his mother, to himself. The accounting of it. Every dinner, every comment, every time you said something and I saw her face and I chose not to see it. I did that. I don't get to put that on you entirely. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Long. Outside, a car went by. The refrigerator cycled on and made its quiet mechanical sound. Melissa had not moved from the doorway. Call the lawyer, Nathan said. Tell them to close the file. Today. Nathan, today, Mom. Not a request. Not delivered with heat. Delivered with the particular quality of a decision that has been made below the level of negotiation. Close it. And then I want you to write Charlotte a letter. Not a call, not a voicemail. A letter. That you write yourself. And I want it to say what actually happened here and what you actually did and what you understand about it now. He paused. Not what you wish you'd done. What you did. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She won't read it, Evelyn said. Maybe not, but you'll write it. He pushed back from the table and stood. Because this isn't about whether she forgives you. It's about whether you understand what happened clearly enough to say it plainly without managing the language. He looked at his mother, this woman he had loved his whole life, this complicated, driven, imperfect woman who had given him everything she knew how to give, and had also, in the giving of it, crowded out everything that wasn't hers. I love you, and I'm asking you to do this. And I need you to understand that if you don't, if you pursue the lawyer, or you call Charlotte, or you do anything that reaches toward her life right now without her invitation, I will not be here. He said it without drama. I'll love you from a distance, but I will not be in this house. The silence after that was the longest of the morning. Evelyn looked at her son. She looked at him with the expression of a woman seeing something she built become something she didn't plan. A person who has developed the full dimensions of himself in directions she didn't control, and is encountering those dimensions now, directly, and finding them harder than expected. All right, she said. 2 words. Nathan nodded. He picked up his phone from the table. He walked to the kitchen doorway, past Melissa, who touched his arm briefly as he passed. A small gesture, quick, the kind that means something without being intended to mean something specific. He walked through the hallway. He opened the front door. He stood on the top step. The morning was fully awake now. The sun past the roofline, the street active, a neighbor's lawn service truck parked 2 houses down with its mowers unloaded and moving. Ordinary, continuous. He called Charlotte, voicemail. Her voice on the recording, professional, brief, a voice he had listened to for 2 years and still could not fully account for. The particular quality of it. The way it had said pregnant across a kitchen table with 14 months of contained fury and not one crack in the surface. He waited for the beep. Charlotte, he said. It's me. I know you're not. He stopped. Reorganized. I was with your father this morning. He told me about the pregnancy complication, about the blood pressure. I know you didn't. I understand why you didn't tell me. He paused. The lawnmowers started up 2 houses down, a white noise that was almost comforting in its indifference. My mother's lawyer, the consultation. That's being closed today. I handled it. It's done. Another pause. I know that's the minimum. I know there's a long way between the minimum and anything that matters. He looked at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday morning continuing without any awareness of what had happened in the last 48 hours. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you for anything. I wanted you to know that I understand now. All of it. The timeline. What you were carrying and who you were carrying it around and why you couldn't put it down in that house. He stopped. I'm sorry. I know that's not sufficient. Your father said that to me in different words, and he's right. It's not sufficient. One more pause. But I'm saying it anyway, because you deserve to hear it even if it doesn't fix anything. He hung up. He sat down on the top step. The lawnmowers moved. The truck down the street ran its engine. Somewhere out over the lake, the sky was the color it turned when the weather coming from the west was serious. A particular shade of gray that Chicagoans knew was not rain yet, but was building towards something. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Chicago Exchange. He answered. Nathan Harrington. The voice was not Voss, not Vincent. A different voice, older, direct, with the quality of a man who did not make unnecessary calls. My name is Gerald Marsh. I'm an attorney. I represent Whitmore Capital Holdings and several of its associated entities, including Fletcher Distribution, Meridian Freight, and Lakeside Commercial Holdings. Nathan went still on the step. I'm calling as a courtesy, Marsh said. Mr. Whitmore asked that you be notified directly rather than through your father. Notified of what? The 3 contracts currently held by Harrington Development Group with the aforementioned entities are due for renewal in September. Standard review process. A pause. As part of that review, a third-party audit has been commissioned to assess the performance and compliance history of all current contractors. Another pause. This is routine. It happens every contract cycle. Mr. Whitmore wanted you to be aware of it. Nathan absorbed this. Is my father's company at risk? He said. That's not something I'm in a position to speculate on, Marsh said. The audit will determine what the audit determines. A pause. What I can tell you is that Mr. Whitmore's instructions to me were to ensure this call was made to you personally, not to your father's office. To you. Another pause. He felt you would understand the significance of the timing. Nathan understood. The custody consultation. Evelyn's call to her lawyer this morning. The timing of this call, within 2 hours of the meeting, within 40 minutes of Nathan leaving his mother's kitchen. Vincent Whitmore knew. Of course he knew. Nathan did not know how. Phone calls monitored, a contact in the lawyer's office, simple inference from the information he already had. But he knew, and he was making sure Nathan knew that he knew, and he was doing it through a legitimate business mechanism that required no threat, no drama, no raised voice. The audit was real. The contracts were real. The outcome of both was connected in ways that didn't need to be stated to the outcome of a series of choices that Nathan and his family were in the process of making. Not punishment, consequence. Tell Mr. Whitmore, Nathan said, that the consultation was closed this morning and that there will be no further legal action regarding Charlotte or the pregnancy. I'll pass that along, Marsh said, and tell him. Nathan stopped, looked at the street, at the clouds building over the lake in the distance. Tell him I heard him. I'll pass that along as well. Marsh hung up. Nathan sat on the step for a long time. Then he called his father. Richard picked up on the second ring. He was in his car. Nathan could hear the road noise heading back to the city. Dad, the contracts, the audit. I just got the same call, Richard said. His voice was careful, steady in the way it had been in Vincent's conference room. The steadiness of effort rather than state. From Marsh. The consultation is closed. I handled it with Mom. A pause. How? I told her what would happen if she didn't close it. Another pause, longer. She agreed. She agreed. Richard was quiet for a moment. Nathan could hear the road and the subtle change in engine noise as his father moved through traffic, and he thought about his father at 64 sitting in a car on the expressway, having spent the morning in a room with Vincent Whitmore, and understanding for the first time the full landscape of what his family had done and what it sat adjacent to. The audit, Richard said, is it? I don't know. I think it's real. I think it was going to happen regardless, but I think... Nathan paused. I think the timing of the call was a message about Mom, about this morning, and now that it's handled. I don't know, Dad. He meant it. He did not know whether the audit would find something or find nothing, whether the contracts would renew or not renew, whether Vincent Whitmore would use his business leverage in any further way. He did not know because he did not know Vincent Whitmore, had spent 2 years being adjacent to him without knowing him at all, and the version of the man he had encountered this morning was not a version that admitted easy prediction. What do we do? Richard said. We wait, Nathan said. We do what he said. We accept whatever Charlotte decides, and we don't reach toward her life without an invitation, and we wait. That's all. That's everything. Richard was quiet on the line. Nathan listened to the road noise and thought about Charlotte in the house in Lincoln Square, resting, her father had said, and he tried to picture it. Charlotte in a bed, her blood pressure being managed, the baby growing through all of this with the total indifference of the very new to the circumstances surrounding their arrival. A girl. He didn't know that yet. He would not know it for months. But he thought of it as a girl for no reason he could explain. And the thought of a girl with Charlotte's composure and Charlotte's particular quality of self-possession did something to his chest that he did not have adequate language for. Dad? He said. Yeah, at the meeting, when he talked about Charlotte protecting us. The contracts, the 7 months. He paused. Did you know she was like that? Before? Richard was quiet for a moment. I knew she was capable, he said. I thought she was quiet. Evelyn said she was... He stopped himself. I didn't look close enough. Neither of us did. She was the smartest person in the house, Nathan said, for 14 months, and we treated her like... I know. Richard's voice was rough. Nathan, I know. The call went quiet. Outside, the clouds over the lake had moved closer, and the light had changed. That particular Chicago shift when the sky commits to something, and the air pressure drops, and the whole city seems to exhale before the weather arrives. The lawnmowers down the street had stopped. The truck was packing up. Nathan's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen, a text from an unknown number. But the number had a Lincoln Square area code, and the text was 3 words. She's asking questions. He stared at it. He texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came in seconds. "Marcus, Mr. Whitmore's driver. She wants to know if you closed the lawyer situation. I told her I didn't know. That's not my call." Nathan's hand tightened on the phone. He typed, "It's closed. This morning. Tell her." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "She says she wants to hear it from you. She'll take a call. Once. Now or not at all." Nathan stood up from the step. He was standing on the front porch of his mother's house in Winnetka with a phone in his hand and the weather coming in off the lake, and the specific weight of everything that had happened in the last 48 hours distributed across every part of him. And his wife was in a house across the city, and she was going to take his call, and he had one chance to say something that was true enough and plain enough and stripped of enough management to mean something to a woman who had spent 14 months in a room full of people performing their feelings, and he called her. His thumb found her name in the contacts and pressed it before the rational part of his brain could organize a reason to wait, to rehearse, to manage the approach. The phone rang once. She picked up. The silence on the line had texture. He could hear her breathing and the ambient quiet of the Lincoln Square house, and somewhere in the background the faint sound of the city through a window that was probably open because Charlotte always slept with a window cracked regardless of the temperature, a habit she'd brought from childhood that Evelyn had mentioned twice as if it were a character flaw. "Charlotte," he said, "I'm here." Her voice was level, not warm, not cold, present in the way she had been present across the kitchen table 2 mornings ago, fully inhabited, fully controlled, the voice of a woman who had decided before picking up exactly how much of herself she was going to make available. "The consultation is closed," he said. "I spoke to my mother this morning. The lawyer was instructed to close the file. It's done." A pause. "When?" "An hour ago, before Marsh called you." "Marsh called my father," she said. "Not me." "I know. I meant before the call was made." He stopped. He was standing on the front porch and the weather was coming in off the lake, and he had told himself he would not manage this conversation, and he was already managing it, already smoothing the language, already performing competence in a space that required the opposite of performance. He stopped, started over. "Charlotte, I'm not calling to explain myself. I don't have an explanation that's adequate for any of it. What happened with the lawyer? I found out this morning in your father's conference room, and I went straight to my mother's house and I handled it. That's the only thing I'm calling to tell you." Another pause, longer. "How is she?" Charlotte said. The question surprised him. "My mother." "Yes." He thought about Evelyn in the blue chair, the way her hands had tightened, the way her voice had lost some of its certainty when he said Vincent's name. "She's processing," he said. "She agreed to write you a letter. An actual letter. I told her what it needed to contain. You told your mother what to write. I told her it had to be honest, that she couldn't manage the language." He paused. "She agreed. Whether she'll do it or what it'll look like, I don't know. I can't control that part." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Your father," she said, "at the meeting this morning, he was—" Nathan stopped, tried to find the accurate word rather than the flattering one. "He was honest. He was more honest than I expected. He said things to me last night before the meeting that I don't think he said to anyone in a long time." He paused. "He told me I needed to fix it, not for the business, because you were carrying my child and I'd watched you walk out." The line held that. "Nathan," her voice shifted, not softer, but more direct, the management layer of it dropping slightly. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without making it about reconciliation. Can you do that?" "Yes." "I don't know if I believe that, but I'm going to say it anyway." A pause. He could hear her inhale, deliberate, the breath of someone choosing their words with care. "I knew about the contracts. The Fletcher accounts, Meridian, Lakeside. I knew for 7 months. I know, your father told me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want your father's business under pressure while I was figuring out what to do about the marriage. I didn't want money to be the reason things changed. Another pause. And I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. He hadn't expected that word. Ashamed of what? Of staying, she said. I knew whose companies those were. I knew what it meant. What it meant that my father's holdings were woven into your family's business without any of you knowing. I knew, and I said nothing for 7 months. And every day I said nothing, I was making a choice to protect people who were not protecting me. Bomb. Her voice stayed level, but something in its register had shifted. Something real and unmanaged was present in it now. I stayed because I thought you would eventually choose me. I kept thinking there would be a moment where you'd see it clearly enough to act. And I kept finding reasons it wasn't that moment yet. Charlotte, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel better, she said. I'm telling you because my father is going to be in your lives for a long time because of our daughter, and I want everything on the table before that happens. No more things I'm carrying quietly. I'm done carrying things quietly. He absorbed that. Our daughter. She had said it without emphasis, without announcement, just dropped it into the sentence like it was already established fact. And maybe for her it was. Maybe she had known for weeks, had been sitting with it in the Lincoln Square house while he'd been across the city not knowing. A girl, he said. A girl. He sat down on the porch step. He didn't decide to sit. His legs made the decision. The step was cool through his trousers, and the clouds over the lake had gone the deep gray of something serious, and he sat there on his mother's front porch, with the weather coming in, and his daughter on the other side of a phone call. Charlotte. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He didn't fix it. I'm not going to ask you to come back. I'm not going to ask you for anything. But I want to be in her life. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you decide it looks like. He paused. I will show up for whatever you allow me to show up for, and I won't push for more than that. The line was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. And then, with a precision that was entirely Charlotte. That's not a yes. That's just me acknowledging I heard you. I know, he said. That's enough for now. She hung up. He sat on the step for a long time after. The first drops of rain came in off the lake 20 minutes later, and he was still sitting there when they started. And he let them, because there was something honest about being rained on that the inside of his mother's house could not currently provide. 3 weeks passed. Evelyn Harrington wrote the letter. It took her 11 days. Nathan knew this because Melissa told him. Melissa, who had become in the aftermath of everything a quieter and more careful version of herself. The video having done something to her that she was still in the process of fully reckoning with. Melissa told him their mother had written and rewritten it, had asked Melissa to read a draft, and Melissa had read it and told her it was still managed, and Evelyn had gone back and tried again. The letter that finally went out was 4 pages, handwritten on plain paper. Not Evelyn's usual stationery, plain paper, as if the performance infrastructure of her usual correspondence would contaminate the content. Charlotte received it. Nathan knew this because her father's driver, Marcus, had become an unlikely and entirely unofficial communication channel. Brief texts, factual, always initiated by Marcus and always on Charlotte's behalf, the information delivered without commentary or interpretation. She received the letter. She read it. That was all. Nathan did not ask what Charlotte's response was. Marcus did not offer it. He found a studio apartment in Lakeview, close enough to Lincoln Square that the geography was honest about his intentions without being presumptuous about his access. He paid his own lease for the first time in 2 years. He called his mother on Sundays. He went to his father's office twice and sat across the desk from Richard, and they talked. Not about the business, not about the audit, but about things further back than that. Things that had accumulated in the space between them for years and been managed rather than addressed. The audit ran its course. The contracts renewed. Not because Vincent Whitmore intervened in their favor. As far as Nathan could determine, he hadn't. The audit found what it found, which was a contractor with a clean compliance record and solid performance metrics, and the renewal was processed accordingly. The business was fine. The business, Nathan understood, had never actually been the point. It had been the frame around the point. In the 7th month of Charlotte's pregnancy, Nathan's phone rang on a Thursday afternoon while he was at his desk. He had gone back to work, a project management role at a development firm that was not his father's, a decision Richard had respected without comment, and it was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Harrington." A woman's voice, professional, calm. "This is Dr. Patricia Ewan. I'm Charlotte Whitmore's OB. She's asked me to call you. She's been admitted to Northwestern Memorial. Her blood pressure elevated significantly this morning during a routine check. We're managing it. She's stable, but we're inducing today. She asked that you be notified." He was standing before she finished the sentence. She's stable. The baby's position is good. We're being cautious, but we're not in emergency territory." A pause. "She said to tell you there's no obligation, but she wanted you to know." He was already reaching for his jacket. "Tell her I'm coming." "I'll let her know." He drove to Northwestern Memorial in 22 minutes, which was 8 minutes faster than the GPS suggested, and involved one yellow light that was more amber than yellow, and one lane change that another driver expressed opinions about. He parked in the structure on Erie and walked fast and then faster, and then he was through the automatic doors of the main entrance and at the information desk, and the woman there gave him a floor and a room number, and he took the elevator, and when the doors opened he stepped out into a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air and institutional calm. Vincent was there. He was sitting in the hallway outside a closed door in a chair that was the standard issue vinyl of hospital waiting areas, and he was wearing a plain gray jacket, and he had a paper cup of coffee in one hand, and he was looking at the door with the expression of a man who has learned to wait at a level that most people never achieve. He looked up when Nathan came around the corner. They looked at each other across 10 feet of hallway. Nathan stopped walking. He had been in Vincent's presence twice, the engagement dinner, the conference room, and both times the encounter had been mediated by context, by roles, by the architecture of the situation. This was different. This was a hallway, and a closed door, and a man sitting alone with his coffee waiting for his daughter to deliver a child, and there was no architecture here to mediate anything. "She's okay," Vincent said. The doctor said, "Stable?" "She's okay. They started the induction an hour ago. It'll be a few more hours." He looked at the chair beside him. "Sit down." Nathan sat. The hallway was quiet. A nurse moved past at the end of the corridor. Somewhere further away, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The light was the flattened, even light of hospitals. No shadows, no warmth. The specific illumination of a place that cannot afford ambiguity. "She said you closed the lawyer situation," Vincent said. "That morning." "Yes. She told me you called." "What you said." Nathan looked at the closed door. "She told you what I said." "She tells me most things." He drank his coffee. "She told me about the conversation in Lakeview, too." Nathan looked at him. "She drove by your apartment building," Vincent said. 2 weeks ago. She didn't stop. She wanted to see if it was real, if you'd actually moved out of the suburb and gotten a place close to here." He paused. "She didn't tell you?" "No. She needed to verify things on her own terms." He set the cup on the floor beside his chair. "That's how she's always been, since she was a kid. She needs to see the evidence with her own eyes before she'll update her model of a situation." Nathan thought about this, about Charlotte driving past his building, about the specific quality of that act, not reaching out, not confronting, just verifying, collecting data before forming a conclusion, the same quality that had made her carry the contract's knowledge for 7 months, the same quality that had made her sign the papers with that particular steadiness and then stand up and walk out without drama. "She's the most precise person I've ever known," Nathan said. "Yes." Vincent said it simply. "She got that from her mother." Nathan had never heard Charlotte mention her mother. He had never asked. He understood now, with the particular clarity of a man who has spent several weeks examining his own patterns of comfortable incuriosity, that not asking had been a choice, a small, repeated choice to keep the relationship at a depth that didn't require him to know the full person. "What happened to her mother?" Nathan said. I want to know. If it's..." "She passed when Charlotte was 11, Vincent said. "Cardiac event. Very sudden." He looked at the door. "Charlotte was with me when it happened. We were at the lake house. Charlotte spent the summer after that teaching herself to cook because her mother had been teaching her and she didn't want to stop. He paused. She finished learning from cookbooks, every recipe her mother had marked. Another pause. She was 11. Nathan sat with that. He thought about Charlotte in his mother's kitchen. The one time Charlotte had offered to cook dinner for a family event, and Evelyn had redirected her to the guest list instead, thanking her for the offer with the particular warmth of someone declining something they've already decided isn't appropriate. He thought about what Charlotte had been carrying in that kitchen, what she had been carrying every time she sat at that table. "I'm sorry," he said, to Vincent, for all of it. For the dinner table, and the centerpieces, and the posture correction, and the 45 minutes, and the video, and his own 14 months of looking at his shoes when he should have been looking at his wife. He said it plainly, without the management that had contaminated every apology he'd attempted in his marriage. "I'm sorry for what happened in my house." Vincent looked at him. For the first time in all their interactions, something in Vincent's expression shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way that the word shift implies. Something small. Something that was what happens to a face when the person behind it decides to extend very slightly a small amount of what has not previously been available. "I know," Vincent said. They sat in the hallway. An hour passed. Then another. A nurse came out twice with updates. Progressing, stable, blood pressure responding to the medication. Vincent nodded each time and thanked the nurse by name, which meant he had been here long enough to learn her name and had paid attention enough to use it. At 4:57 in the afternoon, the door opened. A different nurse, younger, with the slightly elevated energy of someone emerging from an intense room into a quieter one. She looked at Vincent. "Mr. Whitmore, she's asking for you." Vincent stood. He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at him. "Give us a few minutes," Vincent said, not unkindly, with the precision of a man allocating something finite and valuable. "Then I'll come get you." Nathan nodded. Vincent went through the door. It closed behind him. Nathan sat alone in the hallway. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely folded, and he looked at the floor, the clean, unambiguous tile of it. And he breathed. In and out. The monitor somewhere down the hall kept its rhythm. The lights maintained their even, shadowless wash. Time moved at the particular pace of hospital hallways, which is not the same pace as the rest of the world. He thought about the engagement dinner. Vincent across the table, shaking his hand, saying he was glad Nathan loved his daughter. The simplicity of it, the completeness of it. He had taken it as a courtesy and moved on. He understood now that it had been a statement of expectation, that the gladness had been conditional on the thing it referenced being sustained. He thought about Charlotte in the room on the other side of the door. He thought about a girl. At 5:23, the door opened again. Vincent came out. He was not a demonstrative man. Nathan had established this across multiple encounters. He did not perform emotion, had not performed relief or joy or the particular combination of the two that new grandfathers perform in hospital hallways and films. He came out of the room and stood in the hallway, and his face had the quality of a man who has just been handed something he has been holding the space for a very long time. "She's asking for you," he said. Nathan stood up. His legs were steady. He was surprised by that. He walked to the door. He put his hand on it. He looked back at Vincent once, briefly, the look of a man crossing a threshold and wanting, in the last second before he does, to acknowledge the person on the other side of it. Vincent said, "Be honest with her. Always. Even when it costs you." "I know," Nathan said. "You didn't know before," Vincent said, "but now you do. That's the difference." Nathan pushed the door open and went in. Charlotte was propped up in the hospital bed with the particular exhaustion of someone who has come through something physical and enormous and is now on the other side of it, depleted, raw, with a quality of stripped-back realness that normal life never produces. Her hair was down. She had no makeup. She looked like herself in a way that 14 months inside the Harrington house had somehow obscured. The full, unperformed version of herself, without the careful management that proximity to Evelyn had required. She was holding the baby. The baby was wrapped in the hospital's standard-issue blanket, white with the thin blue and pink stripes. And she was very small and very new, with the compressed, intense face of someone who has recently arrived somewhere and is still forming an opinion about it. Charlotte looked up when Nathan came in. Their eyes met across the room. He had prepared in the hallway some version of what he would say. He had been constructing it in the back of his mind for 2 hours, some arrangement of words that would be honest and sufficient and would not perform anything that wasn't real. He had the structure of it assembled and ready. He looked at Charlotte's face. He looked at the baby. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She's here." Charlotte looked down at the baby and then back at him. "She's been here for 20 minutes, and she's already very opinionated about the blanket situation." He walked to the chair beside the bed and sat down because standing felt wrong, felt like the posture of someone presenting themselves rather than being present. He sat, and he looked at his daughter from close range for the first time, and the thing that happened in his chest was not describable in language he currently had access to. It was simply the arrival of something that reorganized everything around it without asking permission. "Can I?" he started. Charlotte shifted the baby slightly, a gesture of offering, not of concession, the very specific body language of someone extending something on their own terms. He took the baby. She was lighter than he expected and heavier than he expected simultaneously, which was not a paradox that resolved but simply two true things. She smelled like something without a name, the particular smell of the very new, which has no analog. She opened her eyes briefly, unfocused, oriented toward light, and then closed them again with the absolute authority of someone who has decided this particular moment does not require their full attention. He held her. Charlotte watched him. "Scarlett," Charlotte said. He looked up. "Her name." Charlotte's voice was steady, but with an undertow of something that wasn't available through the phone, that had only ever been available in physical proximity. "Scarlett Whitmore." He understood the name, not Harrington, Whitmore. Her name, her father's name, the name she had been building toward for the last several months. The name that said what the divorce papers had said, what the packed suitcase had said, what the fountain pen moving across 8 pages had said. She was Charlotte Whitmore's daughter. She would grow up knowing who her mother was. "Scarlett," he said. "You can be her father," Charlotte said. Not offered as charity, stated as something that had been thought about carefully and decided with the same precision she brought to everything. "If you do the work, not the minimum, the work." She looked at him with the level directness that had survived 14 months of being in a house that tried to erode it. "If there's a school event, you're there. If she's sick, you answer the phone. If she asks you a question, you tell her the truth even when it's hard." A pause. "And if you ever, at any point, put your family's comfort above her well-being or mine, that's the last chance. There is no further conversation after that." "I understand," he said. "I need more than I understand." He looked at Scarlett, at the compressed, serious face of his daughter forming opinions about blankets. He thought about Vincent in the hallway, 2 hours of coffee and patient waiting, learning the nurse's name. He thought about what it meant to be that kind of father, the kind that shows up without requiring recognition for showing up, the kind that does not need his steadiness acknowledged to sustain it. He looked up at Charlotte. "I will be there," he said, "every time. I don't expect that to mean anything yet. I know I have to build it from the ground up, and that the ground is not neutral. I know what the ground is. I know what I did with it." He paused. "But I will be there." Charlotte looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. "Not forgiveness, not warmth, not yet. But the opening, the particular tiny aperture of okay, which was not nothing, which was, in fact, the only honest starting place." He handed Scarlett back. Charlotte took her with the automatic ease of someone who had been doing this for 20 minutes and had already, in 20 minutes, developed the specific fluency that the brand new requires. She settled the baby against her chest and looked down at her, and the expression on Charlotte's face was the one Nathan had spent 2 years catching glimpses of, the one that was never available in the Harrington house, the one that required the absence of performance to emerge. Open, real. The face of a woman who knew exactly who she was. The rain that had started in Winnetka that morning had moved across the city and arrived at Northwestern Memorial sometime in the last hour. Nathan could hear it against the window, The specific sound of serious Chicago rain, the kind that comes in off the lake with the conviction of something that has been building all day. The window was fogged at the edges. The room's light was warm and the rain was gray beyond the glass. Evelyn Harrington across town was sitting at her kitchen table with a letter she had written on plain paper and sent 3 weeks ago and had not received a response to. She sat with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking and her phone that she had decided not to use tonight, and the specific silence of a house where everything has been said that needed saying and the rest is waiting. She had taken the decorative clock off the wall 2 weeks ago. She didn't know exactly why. She had put it in a box in the closet. The wall where it had been was empty, and she found she preferred it. She would not know about Scarlett until Nathan called the next morning. She would sit with the information for a long time before she said anything in response. What she said eventually was, "What color are her eyes?" And Nathan told her they were the indeterminate blue-gray of the very newborn, which is not yet committed to any specific answer. And Evelyn said, "That sounds like her mother." And she meant it as a compliment, and Nathan accepted it as one. Richard Harrington at his office on Michigan Avenue had reduced his mother's involvement in the company's social commitments and increased his own presence at the operational level. He had lunch with his project managers now instead of with clients, which was not a dramatic change but was a real one. He had stopped telling the story about the Scottsdale golf event, the one where he'd been introduced to the man whose name he hadn't fully caught. He had told it for years as a story about proximity to power. He stopped telling it because it had become retroactively a story about what he had been adjacent to without understanding, and that was a different story with a different lesson, and he wasn't ready to tell that version socially. He called his son more often, not with advice, just to talk. The calls were awkward at first in the way that calls between men who have never talked freely are always awkward. Too formal, too brief, the language of business bleeding into the language that is supposed to be something else. They got better over time, not because either of them became a different person, but because they kept trying with the consistency that replaces the need for talent. Melissa deleted the video. It had been viewed 240,000 times before she took it down. She deleted it quietly, without announcement, which meant the deletion was noticed and reported on by several accounts that had been following the story, which meant the deletion generated more attention than it would have if she'd left it up, which was an irony she acknowledged to herself and then put away. She sent Charlotte a message 2 months later. Not an apology. She had sent the apology already, in a text that was 3 sentences, factual, unembellished. This was different. She sent a photograph. It was from the engagement dinner 2 years ago. A candid, not a posed shot, taken by another guest. It showed Charlotte laughing at something off camera. She was turned slightly away from the lens, unaware of the picture being taken. She looked entirely herself, not posed, not performing, not managing anything, just laughing. Melissa wrote, "I found this on my old phone. I thought you should have it." Charlotte wrote back, "Thank you. That was all. But it was something." In the months that followed, Charlotte built a life with the same precision she brought to everything. She moved out of her father's house into an apartment 2 blocks away. Close enough for the geography to be honest, but separate enough to be real. She went back to work, a senior position at a design consultancy that had wanted her for 2 years and hadn't stopped asking. She took Scarlett to her father's house on Sunday mornings, and Vincent held his granddaughter in the kitchen while Charlotte made coffee, and the baby regarded him with the focused, evaluative attention of someone doing serious work, and he talked to her quietly about the city outside the window with the patience of a man who had time. Nathan came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always on time, never pushing for more than the schedule allowed. He brought nothing unnecessary, and he stayed for the duration, and he was present in the way that presence requires, not performing attentiveness, just attending. He read to Scarlett with the slightly self-conscious quality of a man who was learning something new and knew he was learning it and did not pretend otherwise. Charlotte watched him figure it out. She did not make it easy. She also did not make it harder than it was. She had decided, somewhere in the hospital room with the rain against the window and her daughter asleep on her chest, that the bitterness she had every right to was a thing she would not give Scarlett to grow up inside of. She would be honest about what had happened. Eventually, in age-appropriate ways over the years, as Scarlett developed the capacity to understand. She would not pretend the marriage had been something it wasn't, But she would also not make her daughter carry the weight of it as a weather system that followed them everywhere. That was the hardest decision she made, harder than signing the papers, harder than packing the suitcase, harder than the phone call, the one conversation, the tight economy of words that left the door open by exactly the width of okay, harder than any of the things that people would look back at and call her strong for, because the strength of those things was visible, and people see visible strength and name it. The decision not to become her own bitterness was invisible. It happened in the interior. It required no audience and produced no dramatic moment, and had to be made again every day, continuously, in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life. Vincent knew. He didn't say so. He just watched his daughter with the particular attention of a man who has been watching her for 28 years and understands the full resolution of what he's seeing. One Sunday morning, 8 months after Scarlett was born, Charlotte was in her father's kitchen making coffee. Vincent was at the table with the baby, who had by then developed strong opinions about most things, and was engaged in a detailed examination of Vincent's watch. The city was visible through the window, the lake in the distance, the rooftops, the late winter sky going white at the edges in the way that means spring is still possible. "I'm going to the design conference in New York next month," Charlotte said. "I know, you told me. I'm thinking about pitching the agency on a new division, residential interiors, not commercial. What does commercial give you that residential doesn't? Scale, speed, volume." She poured the coffee. "Residential gives you, I don't know, specificity. You're building someone's actual life." She paused. "I think I want that." Vincent looked at Scarlett. The baby had succeeded in extracting the watch from his wrist and was holding it with both hands and the focused expression of someone who has obtained exactly what they came for. "Your mother would have liked that," he said. "The residential work." Charlotte looked at him. He didn't say it often. Not never, but not often. When he did, he said it simply, without the performance of grief, without the weight that some people put on the memory of the dead, because the weight is the only way they know to honor them. He said it the way you mention the truth of something that is simply true. "I know," Charlotte said. She brought the coffee to the table and sat across from her father, and they were quiet for a while. Scarlett set the watch down on the table and looked at it with the expression of someone transitioning from acquisition to analysis. Outside, Chicago moved the way it always did. Continuous, layered, indifferent to the particular moments happening inside any given room. Charlotte looked at her daughter. She thought about the dining room table and the fountain pen and the 8 signatures and the door pulling shut with a quiet click behind her. She thought about the step outside, the morning air, the phone call. She thought about being 28 years old and knowing her own worth at the exact moment the people around her had stopped being able to see it. She thought about what that knowing had cost her and what it had protected. Scarlett looked up from the watch. She looked at Charlotte with the direct, unfiltered attention of the very young. No management, no performance, no layer of anything between the looking and the seeing. Charlotte looked back. She thought, "You will know who you are. I will make sure of it. Not because I'll tell you, because I'll show you. Every Tuesday and Thursday when your father arrives on time and stays the full duration. Every Sunday morning in this kitchen. Every decision I make that costs me something and I make anyway, because it's honest. You will grow up inside that. And you will never have to learn what you're worth from the experience of someone failing to see it." Outside, the late winter sky continued its slow negotiation toward spring. The lake held its position. The city breathed. In a house in Winnetka, a woman sat with a cup of tea and an empty wall where a clock used to be. In an office on Michigan Avenue, a man called his son not for a reason but just to talk. In a studio apartment in Lakeview, a man read a book about child development with the focused expression of someone who has decided that the ground he is building on is real and intends to build accordingly. And in a kitchen in Lincoln Square, the most feared man in Chicago's underground held his granddaughter's hand across a table while his daughter drank her coffee. And outside the window, the city moved and the lake held and the sky went slowly, slowly toward the light. The story was never about power. It was never about the contracts or the name on the papers or the empire assembled in silence behind brick walls and holding companies in carefully constructed distance. It was about a woman who knew what she was worth when the room she was standing in refused to show it back to her. It was about a father who waited in hallways. It was about the specific, invisible, daily courage of deciding not to become the thing that was done to you. And it was about a baby girl named Scarlett Whitmore, who arrived in a storm and opened her eyes and looked at the world with the unhurried attention of someone who had plenty of time and intended to use it well.